I'm a little hard on collectibles. I generally don't like them, but before I talk about that, I want to define it a little better. When I say collectible, I mean something that you do not initially start out with. Unlockable abilities, weapons, armor, they're things that you have to collect in order to get them. Someone might look at that and say, what game doesn't have collectibles? And they might be right. Some of my favorite games have collectibles, and for some games it's the whole point that you get these collectibles. You need to get stronger somehow, and I think the only game that doesn't give power-ups and items would be Pong. I think then that it's useful to ignore collectibles that are permanent. That way power-ups, which are temporary like the hammer in Donkey Kong or the mushroom in Super Mario Bros. Aren't counted, but power moons and stars do count. It's also important to not count things that cannot be avoided, like the portal gun in Portal or the 124 power moons you need to see the credits of Mario Odyssey. It's also important to restrict what we consider collectibles to what is literally possible. A collector's dream is likely to collect all of something, but the goal should be within the realms of what the game allows. For example, achievement hunters might want to, but can't get all the achievements in the Stanley Parable. It's impossible, so I don't think it should be counted. A player also can't collect all weapon variations in Borderlands without maxing out the inventory. It might be possible if you bend the rules to allow multiple playthroughs of a game, with hundreds of characters acting as bank substitutes, but considering the game has no built-in way to do it, it shouldn't count as a collectible. Building on that, because anything and everything can theoretically be coveted, I believe a collectible should only be considered collectible if there's a way to do it in the game, sure, but also an incentive for doing it. That incentive might be an achievement, cosmetics, more of the story, more gameplay. Mario Odyssey only asks for 124 moons, but gives bonus secrets for collecting another 700. These are built-in incentives that encourage collection, and which, depending on how you look at it, are collectibles because it's the collection of moons, but also because the bonus incentives are the collection of cosmetics, which fill the shop, collection of more areas on the area select, and the collection of endings, achievements. How one defines bonus might be different though, and I think that's where the real variation in collectibles come from. A bonus might be seen as the collectible itself, like I mentioned earlier, but might also be considered integral to the game. The full experience sure includes everything, all these collectibles, but I doubt anyone who collected everything, all the moons, Koroks, and feathers, would argue it's essential to fully experiencing the game. It's always optional, but as collection becomes less difficult, more fun, and more important to the story, it seems more and more like a necessity for playing the game. For instance, would you say the endings of Cyberpunk 2077 are collectibles? This might require some explanation, but while each ending for Cyberpunk asks the player to complete different quests and make different choices along the way, you could see that as an obstacle course needed to get one of the ending achievements. Thinking differently, the ending itself might be the bonus reward for completing assorted missions, much like assorted missions of gathering Koroks or finding moons. Each of these sets of missions can be seen as equally important and equally optional, making the ending of one mission set a bonus to someone who did another, and therefore a collectible with a reward. Maybe some believe that the main quest lines, however many there are still required and therefore not collectibles. But maybe you'd agree with me that side quests are collectibles. Side quests usually give a reward, like the bonuses you see from collectibles. They aren't required, you can ignore them entirely after starting a game, and the completion of them is, in games like Ghost of Tsushima, permanent. Permanent in that there's a mix of the side quests that ask you to take down camps of invaders, help an NPC, or even do whole optional storyline quests. All of them, no matter the level of complexity or seeming importance, don't affect the main quest, while also being permanent once completed. NPCs don't need help again, and camps stay taken over. There's still the main story, and still only one ending. But the optional storylines offer more of the game to complete. Maybe despite the added-on, optional, permanent, and completion-encouraging nature of side quests, someone still doesn't consider them collectibles. Maybe because the reward isn't a number going up by 1 and the understanding of getting closer to a goal. Maybe because there isn't any actual collecting since you're only crossing off tasks from a checklist. Maybe because some side quests are never ending and therefore impossible to complete. Still, my belief is that most quests are collectibles, since while I could add to the definition that collectibles have to also be collected as an item alongside being optional, permanent, and collection encouraged game editions, I think it would unduly exclude collectibles that function like items in a checklist. As a test, I'll look at the game Hades, which I remember for having multiple collection systems. All artifacts, that means chthonic keys, darkness, gemstones, nectar, and more, are consumable, temporary items, and therefore not collectibles. All weapons in Hades are collectibles, since unlocking them only allows for more bounties to be completed. They last forever, and they're encouraged to be collected in order to fill out the infernal arms and to get more loot from bounties. Keepsakes are also collectibles since they encourage collection with the reward of additional stats, are optional in reaching the end of the game, and they last forever. Additionally, they encourage collection by sitting alongside other keepsakes in a cabinet that can be filled up. Companions are similar to keepsakes and would be collectibles too. The system I wouldn't include under this new definition of collectibles would be house contractor purchases. Purchases made to the house contractor act as permanent cosmetic items, permanent power-ups, music themes, and new character interactions. While I include all of these as collectibles, given that the contractor's list is whittled down as you purchase more items, the definition that excludes checklists and non-items might only include decorations and music themes as collectibles. The character interactions and invisible permanent power-ups are treated like items in the shop checklist when you purchase them, but are not technically items in the game, so they get ignored. Checklists shouldn't be ignored, but one might look at my inclusion of quests as collectibles as too broad, as it might include entire games and their endings. Collectathons might be excluded due to their required nature of the collectibles, but games like Nier Automata, whose gameplay allows for several serious and several joke endings, might still be included. Many endings alongside achievements and slightly modified credits for each ending encourages the collection of each ending and ending credits. The game can be boiled down to a collection of different endings, which is weird to say, but it makes sense, at least to me. I think anyone who's played a game twice or thrice to see the other sides of it knows they're collecting the endings. It's optional, playing the game again, it's permanent, forcing the players to reload a save or restart to get another ending, and it encourages collection with its promise of similarly engaging but different story and gameplay. Nier Automata definitely encourages collection of its endings with its alphabetic labeling, its achievements for each ending and for getting all endings, and the ease of which you can get most of the endings. The endings are collectibles. Only in games that prevent and discourage restarts would they not be considered collectibles, which is obviously not true for Nier Automata. Now, with collectibles defined, I think it's important to talk about the different kinds of collectibles. This likely won't require so much defining. Collectibles exist with several variables, which can be represented through sliders. There's a slider for the impact on story and one for the impact on gameplay, which are interconnected and act in negative association. For example, story impact was at 50%, gameplay impact could be anywhere between 0 and 50%, but not above 50%. If story impact was at 100% in a game, that collectible would be a kind of audio log without impact on gameplay. And if gameplay impact was at 100%, it would be a secret boss battle or some weapon unlock with no impact on story. This could be shown as a triangle instead of two interconnected sliders, with high impact on story being on one edge, high impact on gameplay being another, and no impact being the third. If I had to place a few collectibles on this triangle, Ghost of Tsushima questlines would have an impactful mix of both story and gameplay. Mario Moons would have a tiny bit of story, but mostly just gameplay as it's a collectathon. MMORPGs would be almost all gameplay, even if they technically have stories. Keepsakes and Hades would have a bit of story and a bit of gameplay without much impact. Fetch quests and games would have little to no impact, but would have a little gameplay and story with an emphasis on gameplay, and things like cosmetics might be entirely unimpactful to a little bit of impact on story, but nearly no impact on gameplay. There's more sliders. I made a triangle to simplify that relationship, but there's like 20 more sliders. Another slider might be difficulty, another might be fun, another might be the time sink, another might be how good the reward is, and the last might be payment required, like actual currency, real world money. There's some negative correlation between difficulty and fun, but because the easiest levels of difficulty are generally unfun, with only things at a little bit of difficulty being the most fun, I imagine it's less of a negative linear correlation and more of a negative parabolic. Time sink appears to be related to difficulty at first, since difficult tasks usually take longer to complete, but because the mechanical skill needed to complete a task doesn't change with time, it's clear they aren't related. As an experiment, say there was a maze that gave a piece of a collectible, but it took at least 6 hours to walk through. It would have little difficulty since it doesn't require much skill, but a high time sink since it requires a lot of time to complete. If I made the maze significantly shorter, only taking 2 minutes to walk through, the difficulty would still be the same, even if the time sink became much lower. For an example on how I would rate Mario Moons, which vary from mechanically easy to somewhat repetitive, I'd consider medium difficulty but a high time sink. Now, the collectibles use and reward. If a collectible is needed to beat the game, it's obviously required, but when it's only nearly needed to beat the game, what is it? This might be, for instance, the reward for collecting pieces of a weapon. You get all the pieces of the weapon, and with the completed weapon, you can now beat the end boss easily as opposed to with much difficulty. To make it more clear when a collectible becomes required, the definition of required should be updated. It's not required because it's necessary to beat the game, it's required because the alternative is harder. A collectible should take going out of one's way to get it, but if spending the time collecting all the weapon pieces is easier than fighting the enemy with what you have now, it's a required collectible, therefore not a collectible. In other words, as long as it's not necessary, no matter the near necessity of collecting, if the time sink and difficulty needed to find all the collectibles is fair, it's still just a collectible. On the other hand, if the time sink and difficulty for getting the collectible is lower than the time sink and difficulty for beating it without the collectible, then it's required and not a collectible. When the reward doesn't just give an easier experience though, and instead a completely new experience, a la needing all 100 eggs to see the true ending, it's a different story, literally. True endings can be as simple and inconsequential as Arkham Knight, where collecting every collectible and side quest only gives you a couple minutes extra in the cutscene, and most, even if they ask you to get collectibles to get a new ending like in Bloodborne or Code Vein, only change the final few minutes of the game's story. These minor changes, despite being very important lore-wise, are offset by the difficulty of getting the collectibles and fighting a new boss, as well as the time sink of replaying the game. Actually, the biggest rewards and biggest changes to the story come from the collectibles known as DLC. DLC should always be optional, but DLC also makes comparably huge changes to an already established game, with new mechanics, quests, collectibles, and more story. While these big changes might otherwise make it a required feature, it's offset by the DLC's additional cost and nature. The base game, like the base way of playing, is the required alternative and should always be preferable to the going out of the way collectibles. As such, the bigger the changes and the bigger the rewards of the expansion, the more the DLC is allowed to and should cost. However, while greedy conglomerates might want it the other way around, when a collectible is too important, it's not going to cost more, it actually won't be sold at all. Modern sensibilities suggest that if a game is coming out, it should be complete, especially if it comes with a modern game price tag. So an additional optional part of a modern game can't and shouldn't make the game more complete, meaning it can't be required to the game, meaning it can't have a true ending. If it is required, if it does make the game more complete, then it's expected to come packaged with the game. On the topic of collectibles that cost real-world money, in-game purchases themselves could be considered collectibles. in that for cosmetics, it's optional, it's permanent, and it's encouraged to be collected with advertisements, tie-in deals, unlockable quests, a filled armory slot, and differentiation from your peers and fraternity within your friend group. Something like a Battle Pass 2 would be a collectible, as it offers a very clear checklist to fill out and quests to complete in order to collect permanent optional items. The price of these collectibles is largely dictated by the reward, as I mentioned, but is also soft capped by the price, difficulty, and time sink of the base game and base play. The most famous example of battle passes, for example, Fortnite, is a consistently updated, free-to-play game that offers numerous cosmetics. The characters and dances Fortnite is known for, however, are not free and are limited to a specific battle pass or item shop day. Despite this, most members have cosmetics, with new players encouraged to buy cosmetics both to fit in and to differentiate themselves. The constantly updating item shop, where no item is shown twice unless separated by months, gives new players ample options to choose from while also making it impossible to get all options. Any item in the Battle Pass will never be seen again, and any item in the item shop likely won't be seen again for months, which breeds the idea of buying now in order not to miss out now. The pricing works to Fortnite's favor, since while the game is free and therefore soft caps the price at $0, the $10 buy-in can theoretically multiply and last forever, with the in-game Battle Pass offering 140% of the initial buy-in of V-Bucks, and the free nature of the game but entirely paid nature of cosmetics allows for the two to exist distinctly from one another. What this means is that while these optional permanent collection-encouraged items that people have to go out of their way to get technically cost more than the game itself, because there's no way to get cosmetics outside of paying for them and therefore no alternative, and because the cosmetics are cosmetic only, so not very important, it works fine. With payment defined, that's all the collectible sliders made, so I think I'll finish my thoughts on collectibles. I don't really like collectibles, but I hate them to varying degrees. My second most hated ones are paid collectibles. Paid collectibles can be cosmetic and pointless, or have a heavy impact on story and gameplay. As cosmetics, these paid collectibles target people who want differentiation, people who want fraternity or to show their fraternity, and the people who are habitual and serial spenders. As DLCs, there's more of the game to play, more of the story to see, and possibly more fun to have with all the new junk they add. These collectibles are often one of two extremes, clearly boring to a useless degree or vice versa, overwhelmingly cool and useful to a pay-to-win degree. My problem with paid collectibles as a whole stems with the money they cost. These collectibles are interestingly hateable and controversial because they take something fun about the game, the gameplay, the story, the social aspect of cosmetics, and it adds a paywall to it. It's a toll on further and fuller enjoyment of a game, and while it's a toll I pay, it's still annoying to differing levels. More acceptable and simpler would be reward collectibles. These collectibles allow people to play more of a game that they find fun, give players an advantage in completing the required parts of the game, and likely have dialogue and plot which expands the game's story to varying degrees. Sometimes the collectibles are hidden items in the game's map, but sometimes they work as side quests, giving you an optional mission with permanent rewards. These collectibles are more respectable due to their lack of a paid nature, but since their quality can range from boring copy-paste quests like in Watch Dogs
to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We dug a little deeper.
Seems easy. Have a target who has stolen data. I need to stay on him and steal it back. After that, he needs to disappear. Needs to disappear.
These collectibles are more respectable due to their lack of a paid nature, but since their quality can range from boring copy-paste quests like in Watch Dogs to separate storylines like in Ghost of Tsushima or to the entire game like in MMORPGs, my annoyance with them is varied and ranged. Also, because reward collectibles are varied, I suppose my third most hated collectible to my second to last would just be different versions of reward collectibles, from most important to the game to least important. In that effect, my least hated collectible would have to be pointless collectibles. Not pointless in that they aren't fun, but in that the reward is cosmetic. It's hardly even a reward, but because it's so pointless, I know that I can collect it if I want, but if I don't, who cares? It's the least disagreeable, and in this category might be the camos in Call of Duty or the ranks in Call of Duty. My most hated collectible is hard collectibles. Hard like both difficult and time-wasting. Not to say that I really enjoy things that take 2 seconds, because really games are just weird skill and determination tests, so it wouldn't be fun if those were easy, but when the requirement to unlock a collectible, whether it be purely for collection or otherwise, is to fight a difficult boss or complete 1,000,000 tasks, I hate it. It could sound weird to compare fighting a boss with monotonous humdrumming tasks, but it's generally the same thing I do for both. A difficult boss usually means I need to try again and again and again.
Holy fuck, bitch, calm down. Oh my god, access had enough. Okay, holy shit. No, no, right, wait. What? What? For some reason I died. Oh, what? Okay. Do your thing. Go. Alright, chill here. What?
Much like the monotonous repetition of completing the same tasks over again. For completing 1,000,000 tasks, it doesn't matter if I like what I'm doing at the start, I generally stop liking it, and for bosses, it doesn't really matter if I eventually beat him, since beating him doesn't matter. Collectibles can't be too important, so not only does this humdrumming take away from the game itself, but it's the doing so knowing full well that it's all optional, and even if the reward is permanent and useful, it's never going to be worth it realistically. It's not allowed to be worth it, otherwise it wouldn't just be a collectible. When collectibles are too difficult to be fun and too unrewarding to be interesting, I quit, and collectibles should never be the reason I stop having fun, so I